The Fallout TV show and the games are great, not this one, but if you want a different flavour of the post-apocalypse, here are fantastic indie worlds to explore, beginning with Wasted, a game that is pretty much roguelite Fallout 3, having a similar kind of user interface, colour scheme and look, but in which thermonuclear war has destroyed humanity's finest, only leaving the toughest and dumbest to survive to fight over booze. Yes, it's a pub crawler title by another name, in which you are fighting mutants and other survivors for alcohol, having the cheekily named shots system as a parallel to the VETS system, as well as powerful hangover abilities and mutations to keep each run fresh. It is from another time and place, since this released way back in 2016, but the cool thing about stylized visuals like this is that it still looks decent in 2024. This next game is still in early access, but already has a decent showing with 3,000 Steam reviews and a very positive rating, in which Death Trash is set in the post-apocalypse, but one in which cosmic horrors play a much more central role. While it has RPG systems and elements, combat here is in real time, so it might resemble more of a Zelda or Diablo game as compared to a Fallout 1 and 2 style RPG. But the semi-open world structure is fascinating to explore. While still in early access, the developer is working on the game and it is by no means abandoned, with the 1.0 release still planned for 2025. Here's a game that you probably have not heard about named Dust to the End, a game with turn-based RPG style combat, but has the added management simulation layers of having to trade and negotiate for the resources that you need to survive. After a nuclear war, humanity retreated to underground shelters and 100 years later have slowly begun to emerge once again, only to find a brutal world filled with dangerous marauders. It is reminiscent of those caravan trading games all about resource management, with the turn-based combat system involving mercenaries that you can recruit having combat a little bit more like Darkest Dungeon. While this trailer is in Chinese, there is an English translation available which isn't the greatest, but it is serviceable, so maybe put this on your wishlist for now and wait for a sale. The latest entry in this space is Broken Roads, basically Fallout Australia in all but name, since the Fallout series is set in what was once the USA, with this being set in the Australian outback instead. Their take on the freeform RPG narrative system is something known as the moral compass, where the words that you choose and the actions you will take will shift your spot on the compass, which is something different to wrap your head around as compared to the more straightforward Paragon/Renegade system in games like Mass Effect. However, it is not without its flaws, since the game did launch rather rough, which can be chalked up to a relatively young team making a game like this, but they are still taking in feedback to patch and balance the game, so maybe support this team if you can, but do expect some rough edges. Okay, this next title might be a little bit more of a difficult recommendation since there's a very slow start to Underrail and the game is kind of obtuse, but if you can push through, I promise that this game is worth it. Set in a world where the surface of the planet has become inhospitable, humans have retreated underground into the Underrail, a series of interconnected metro stations, and live in the darkness. There's no getting out of the vault moment in this game, but rather everything is just dark and depressing, in which your character is caught up in the conflict between warring factions. You will need to work to understand this game, and there are instances of frustrating trial and error, so do heed my warnings, but there's certainly something of interest here. The post-apocalypse is a commonly used setting for games across all genres, so for something a little different, how about Endzone: A World Apart, a survival city builder game in which you start a new civilization with a band of survivors. An ecological disaster has struck the Earth and humanity, again, retreats underground. Sound familiar yet? But 150 years later, they have emerged from the darkness into an extremely hostile world. Not so much from super mutants and death claws, but extreme radiation, sandstorms, toxic rains and droughts. It is against this hostile background that you will need to find a way to survive, constructing buildings, gathering resources, stocking up for disasters, and advancing up the tech tree, eventually being able to send expeditions out to explore and to possibly gain vital information. Old school indie game fans might remember a little game called Banished, and this is similar in feel, since more often than not, you'll find that all your people have died and you need to start over, but it's the learning and mastery of this game's systems that makes this so satisfying, and as an added bonus, there is a sequel in development as well. As mentioned, Fallout is set in the USA, and the parallel to that is Atom RPG, set in the Soviet wasteland after both the Soviet Union and the Western Bloc destroyed each other in 1986, the so-called mutually assured destruction scenario that was the focus of the Cold War. It is an alternate history which has some roots in actual history, but like Fallout, the radiation has caused its share of damage and mutations, which have resulted in enemies like giant spiders. Although of course, as the trope goes, humans are the real monsters and will be the primary threat. It lists Fallout 1 and 2 as inspirations, and that can be seen in things like the combat and stat system, and while it does have its rough edges, it is charming in its own right, with the different setting being the most interesting part. Speaking of which, 3 years after the release of Atom RPG, the developer released a standalone sequel/expansion titled Trudograd, which is a direct continuation of the story of the first game, but can also be purchased and played without prior knowledge, and in fact, does address issues that people were having with the original. Visually, this game looks nicer as well, with some snowy areas, as well as having more interesting locations such as a tanker in a frozen sea, along with a power armor equivalent. If I were to pick between the two, this would be my recommendation, although for context, you should play both. Another excellent indie CRPG which is paying tribute to Fallout is ENCASED, where, if you're lucky enough to be watching this around the time the video releases, it is at a whopping 90% discount, so why not give it a go? And if the discount window has passed, it goes for about $5 during the Steam summer and winter sales, so that would be a good time to get it as well. It is set in an alternate history 1970s, which has an interesting premise in which an enormous structure known as the Dome has been discovered in the desert, which just so happens to be a one-way trip for humans, in that you can enter but cannot leave. Of course, a corporation has made it their mission to extract the valuable secrets from said dome, sending employees into it to explore, and you play as one such employee just doing your job but become embroiled in something much larger. The alt history 1970s aesthetic is neat, with interesting characters, RPG systems, skills, as well as engaging combat, making this a must-play. A common pairing with the Fallout series are the Stalker series or Metro series, the former being set in the Chernobyl exclusion zone and the latter of the metro tunnels in Moscow, Russia after a nuclear war, both being first-person shooter with survival horror elements. If you've played those, how about Chernobylite, a game that comes to us from a mid-sized team that doesn't get talked about enough? While the setting is the same as the Stalker series, it plays quite differently, since most interestingly, it's not really an open world title. You go on various missions in the day and have a crew along with you, so you venture out to explore and scavenge and fight, return to your home base, rest and talk to the NPCs, and then start another day with another mission, being more linear in structure, although you do have some choices on where to go. Apparently, they scanned the actual area in the real world with drones to recreate this on a realistic scale, with an intriguing central mystery as well, and is worth a play. One of my favourite post-apocalyptic games is Mutant Year Zero Road to Eden, a tactical RPG like XCOM, but in which you control unique mutant creatures with the progression system involving mutating these characters to give them new powers. Interestingly, you explore the map in real time in an almost stealth game kind of way, but upon encountering enemies, it snaps into turn-based combat and is one of the most deeply satisfying tactics titles. Scavenging for resources is par for the course in the post-apocalypse, since you never know what might be useful, with this very naturally applying to the extraction shooter genre, with Zero Sievert being a must-play. Yes, it's a pixel art title, so that sticks out as compared to the rest of the games on this list, but that has not stopped games from being excellent, so do not let looks deceive you. This is one of the most brutal and challenging titles out there as you venture out and encounter enemies, leading to tough situations and choices to make on how you can safely extract out of the zone back to safety with all your loot. Most curiously, however, is that this is a single player game with no co-op or PvP, which is something that players are asking for, although I don't know how easy that would be to implement, but for an indie escape from Tarkov-like experience, give this game a shot.
I just wanted the goat to hit you in the ass.
This next title comes with a little bit of an asterisk, since Wasteland 2 was made by In Exile Entertainment, which has now since been acquired by Microsoft, so it is not indie anymore, but at the time, this was funded on Kickstarter in 2012 from a then indie team, hence it gets a spot on the list. This is the sequel to Wasteland from 1988, which was the game that inspired Fallout 1, so this goes back years in terms of history. You control a squad of desert rangers sent to investigate the death of one of their own, with the troubling discovery of a synthetic human kicking off the events of the game. It is set in the American Southwest in the year 2102, but where the bombs dropped in 1998, so again about 100 years after the events of thermonuclear war. With the open-ended decision-making, perk and quirk system, and even combat, making people say that this would have been Fallout 3 if Bethesda did not take it into first person, which is very high praise. So do yourself a favor and play this, or the not indie Wasteland 3 as well. Despite the immense popularity of this game, a lot of you are still sleeping on Kenshi, a sandbox open world RPG that straight up slaps you in the face time and again. Since, as how it should be in the post-apocalypse, survival and staying alive is supposed to be difficult, so do know that going in. However, once you get past that, the possibilities of this game are seemingly endless as you explore various locations and get to know the various factions inhabiting the world. You will eventually be able to construct your own settlement, with skills here being leveled up the more you use them. But more interesting is the simulation aspect. The way that the world is modeled is impressive, since the death of an important NPC might just create a power vacuum which causes another faction to invade, which can drastically shift the balance of power. And yes, while it does look kind of again, don't judge a book by its cover. For something a little different, watch this video for the best cyberpunk indie games.